Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Hey, listen, they're just not going to stop, are they? Even in a lame duck, Michigan lawmakers are pushing a radical overhaul of sex education in public schools, prioritizing gender identity, contraceptive distribution, and pregnancy options over, you guessed it, traditional family values. So there's a proposal out there now totally abandons abstinence as a way to not get pregnant. Did you hear that? Apparently, if you don't want to get pregnant, abstaining from sex doesn't work. So, what does in their strange perspective when you talk about these Michigan lawmakers? Well, that's what's under consideration right now. It looks like it's probably going to go through because they've got a lame duck and they're about to lose power. So, what works? Lessons on sexual orientation, consent, body autonomy, doing whatever you would like with your own body, and allowing schools to distribute condoms and contraceptives. And proponents call it all inclusive. But critics argue, rightfully so, it undermines parental authority, promotes risky behavior, and imposes controversial ideologies on young students. And leads to things like getting pregnant, which eventually also leads to abortion without parental consent as well, at the direction of schools and teachers and all those different types of things. So Dave Bondi is going to join me in a few seconds to talk about this curriculum update in the schools in the formerly great state of Michigan, challenging these time-tested principles and really the rights of families to shape their children's understanding of morality and responsibility. So that's coming up in just a few seconds. Also, just a reminder to chime in, comment during this particular program, ask questions, and we can pose those to Dave Bondi as well. I can answer some as well, in addition to Dave Bondi, and we'll get to those in a moment as well. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, click that notification bell, watch the videos or the podcast, and share them as well. It's a big help. Thanks so much. All right, sweeping changes to sex education. Michigan House Democrats are pushing a bill to dramatically expand sex education, introducing topics like gender identity, sexual orientation, contraceptive access, while sidelining things at work like, traditional abstinence-based approaches. Now, we don't want to do that because we're the school, we're now in charge, and parental authority here is totally being undermined as a result. The bill sidelines parents' roles by mandating schools to teach this content that could conflict totally with family values and leaving very little input for parental input or oversight or authority. Dave Bondi joins me. It's Keeping It Real with Dave Bondi is the program he has, also a Substack of the same name, and it's good to see you, Dave. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Great to see you.
Yeah, so you've written about this. I saw what you wrote, and I saw it, I think it was yesterday or maybe yesterday or the day before. But what is going on in the state of Michigan? Because to me, it sounds like they're trying to ram some things through before they lose their majority in the House.
That's the big thing. And I'm somewhat of a journalism nerd, I would say. I go on websites daily and look what legislation has been dropped that maybe doesn't make the news. And I believe it was last week, I went on and found this legislation that had dropped. I didn't really hear it anywhere else in the media.
No.
And now it's getting out there. But yeah, and this is not something I think people were asking for. And it's interesting that it's coming up in the lame duck session now. The Michigan legislature, they're trying to push through a lot before the Democrats lose control in the House. And I'm hearing from lots of parents on all political sides, and they're not too happy about this.
No, and they shouldn't be. In fact, they should be made aware of it, which thankfully that's what you're doing here because you're one of the first places I saw it as well. I saw some other journalists since come out with this also. So thankfully there are some who are out there discussing that, but the legacy outlets in Michigan and elsewhere are not discussing this. And I know what's happened in Canada. This is all throughout their schools. I think it started in British Columbia and it's swept through the entire country. And they're trying to do it here state by state. So let's get into this. So this proposed, sex education bill in Michigan, basically what it prioritizes teaching gender identity and sexual orientation while reducing an emphasis on abstinence. What is that? What's in the bill itself?
Yeah, just summarizing it, because some of these bills you need to be a legal expert to read them. So that's why I try breaking them down.
Yeah.
It adds comprehensive resources on LGBTQ plus, eliminates language that bars abortion from being taught as a method of family planning, introduces sensitive topics like you said, gender identity, sexual orientation, and reproductive rights. And then it goes on, just digging into those issues. It was State Representative Rachel Hood, Democrat from Grand Rapids, the bill's sponsor,
Hmm.
and she said this approach ensures young people understand bodily autonomy, recognizes boundaries. But this is not what I remember as sex education, and I have two young ones as well. And the parents I'm talking to think of sex education as, okay, here's a man, here's a woman, this is
Mm.
how a baby is made.
Right.
That's the education. Getting into all these other issues, I'm hearing from parents this is not where they want to go. Not even uh, even parents who are in the middle or even on the left a little bit. They think it's a little too far.
Yeah, it sounds to me like because I'm a parent, I think it's a lot too far. And I remember the
Right.
days too when I was younger. It was like, okay, we had to have that talk about they called it the birds and the bees, and here's how a baby was what a baby comes from, and here's your mom and dad have to do it. All it's an awkward discussion, but it's best done and best left up to the families and the parents to do that. And then they started introducing this in the schools. This is how it all happens. This is biology, so let's discuss it. And then it became ideology, not biology, and now they're actually against things like abstinence. When you talk about like bodily autonomy, what my understanding, the lessons that are being taught in the schools is that essentially what it means is, yeah, have sex, but make sure it's the sex that you want to have and that no one forces it on you. And okay, there's a lesson in that because you don't want to be, raped or sexually assaulted, but they're encouraging sex to occur. And the best way to avoid an STD is actually through a condom, not avoiding sex, because we wouldn't dare ask you to, abstain from something that we support. That seems to be more of the messaging that's going out there.
It does, and I've looked at the legislation, and I forget. I believe a parent can opt out of this if it goes into place, but that's still a problem. The fact that this is being brought up, and many parents I talked to recently are saying, didn't we just vote as a country against radicalism in the
Yes.
election? Didn't the seven swing states went to former President Trump, and shouldn't that have sent a message that, whoa, let's take a step back from radical extreme left? But then you get the Michigan, some Democrats in Michigan that are like, oh no, we're going to push it forward. And it was just, I shouldn't say shocking, expected, but I guess it didn't send a message to some of the Michigan Democrat lawmakers.
Well, I think it sent a message. You're right. It didn't in one sense, but it also sent a message to the one that really want this radical ideology pushed down the throats of these kids to hurry up and get it done before they're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So what I understand, so like when you talk about abortion, for example, so they had this curriculum that requires non-biased teaching, is the way they describe it. Non-biased teaching of these pregnancy outcomes, including abortion. So essentially, they're presenting abortion in a non biased way, yet in a very supportive way of presenting abortion. So, does that essentially mean that you can't be biased if you're opposed to abortion as being a viable
Yeah.
alternative?
From the way I read it, yes, that's what I would say. And I mean, maybe I'm old school, but I don't even want my children learning about abortion. I mean, there's certain issues I think that you would agree need to be taught in the home, and others
Yes.
would argue, well, what about the kids who don't have a good home life or don't have a home? And there's resources for those kids out there, and that's a big argument I've had on other stories. Like in Michigan now, they have clinics in certain schools where kids don't have to tell their parents if they get certain counseling, and they're like, well, kids could be abused at home. There's resources for that, though. I think it is taking a lot away from the parents, things that I want to tell my kid or talk about or not talk about. But you're right to say non-bias about that. There's a lot of limbo about here that I'm not very safe with, happy about.
No, not at all. And by the way, and I know that Dana Nessel has made this argument that some kids can be abused in their homes, therefore we don't want there to be homeschooling. And
Yeah,
she's made
exactly.
that argument as it relates to this foster care system that, in and of itself, they were responsible for the abuse that occurred in these foster homes. They're trying to turn it around on parents in homeschools, which it had nothing to do with. And they
It didn't.
completely ignored the fact that a lot of kids are abused in schools, as if school is a safe place to talk about these issues. Come to us, tell us about how you feel. If you're born a girl, you actually feel like you're a boy. We will steer you in that direction, but we won't tell your parents about it. This, to me, and I've spoken to enough lawmakers now that they completely support that the parents are the ones who are dangerous. So we're going to affirm a child's feeling that they feel like they're not the sex or the gender that they were born as. So we're going to affirm that and help them go down that pathway without telling their parents, who they're, I think, teaching these kids are actually dangerous because they don't support you. So is that part of this curriculum at all? I mean, or is that an element of it?
It feels like it. This is an advertisement for homeschooling, honestly. The state of Michigan, actually, what you talked about, proposed, it wasn't introduced into legislation, but it was talked about by the Michigan Department of Education to have a homeschool registry. And that really got a lot of outrage among people. And when Dana Nessel was talking about how, homeschooling leads to more abuse or so forth, that woke up a lot of people as well, because I know a lot of homeschooling parents, they took offense to that. It was just absolutely wrong. And other states do it completely differently. Florida is all about school choice and all about every different ways of educating their children. Michigan is so far behind. I've lived as a reporter, and so have you, in different states. I lived in Alabama, North Carolina, and I always thought growing up, I'm in the North, Michigan is advanced. Michigan is actually horrible when it comes to so many issues. And
Yeah.
parents are seeing that. Parents see this and they're like, oh, hell no. So,
Good. But they can't say that until they're made aware of it. So that's why it's important to have good journalists like yourself bringing this to the light. You
well,
hear a lot of, go
let
ahead.
me interrupt real quick.
Yes.
You played a video when we were introing me. I think it was WLNS or one of the stations in
Yeah.
Lansing.
Yeah.
People like yourself and me, we are basically forcing mainstream media, legacy media, to cover these stories. If myself, if you, if others, we do these stories, they get going viral. The stations have kind of somewhat no choice but to cover them. I've sat in newsroom meetings before where they're like, this is starting to go viral on social media. We got to
Yes.
do it. We got to do it. And then they do it. So I think independent journalism is starting to push a little. And that's
Yeah.
why you're seeing these stories. So just I saw the clip
No.
you played, and I think it was
Yeah.
because of the viralness that started it.
Oh, I totally agree with you. In fact, I've been in editorial meetings like yourself where it's like, hey, this is going out on Twitter right now. They're starting to talk about this. It's a reverse role. It used to be that the social media platforms were following what was in the news. And now these newsrooms are scratching the head. Hey, what should we cover? Let's look to Twitter at the time, or now X, or Instagram. What's going on TikTok? And let's cover that now because that's making news. It's all viral. So that's why it's important what you're doing, and why I'm happy I'm doing it here. Now, language matters in a big way. And there's the language that they put in these bills, and there's the language that the supporters of these bills use to make it sound like this is like scientifically based and is much needed. So you put in these, like, they'll say this is all medically accurate, which we're discussing in the schools. It's trauma informed, which makes you think, okay, cool, what does exactly that mean? Trauma informed. Do you think these labels that they're putting in there, are they just used to justify these controversial topics under the guise maybe some scientific credibility?
I'm Googling right now what is or trauma informed, but yeah, trauma informed, an approach that acknowledges that trauma can impact people, groups, and communities and aims to reduce harm. Okay, I still don't know
Yeah.
much there.
Yeah. No. No. Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
vague
and it's a way,
definition.
yeah, and it's a way to get around certain things. And I see in government a lot, especially with abortion, it's celebrated. And no matter, I think, what way you think of abortion, I don't think it should be something where you cheer or have a parade. That's always interesting, that it's something that's, by some, it's celebrated. It's a really important issue. But yeah, the way they word things leads a lot of um don't know exactly what they're talking about.
Well, it leaves a lot of room for them to do whatever they really want to do in the first place. It's vague
Exactly.
enough to say, okay, this is actually what we believe this means, and it's hard to legally define that. So you also shield yourself from lawsuits and all of that. So the bill mandates gender identity and sexual orientation is part of the sex education. Do you have any sense that that's going to be, positive teaching of gender identity and sexual orientation, or is it a warning about what's being, or is it just all affirming what the child, how the child feels? And there's hundreds of different genders and what that kind of thing.
I would assume that's how it would be,
Yeah.
because most of the organizations, whoever they're going to be consulting with, or to getting the educational material, that's what's out there. I, yeah, that's what I believe it will be. I haven't looked at any of what it would be, or the curriculum or so forth, but I'm assuming that's what it would be, and
So do you
that's
think
something
that?
that, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, they're arguing that the bill promotes inclusivity because that's another word they use a lot. Inclusivity. That's why we're putting this in there by addressing diverse sexual orientations and gender identity. But do you think that does this inclusivity come at the expense of excluding or marginalizing what we would call traditional values? That hey, actually, another viable option here is that there are only two genders, and your feelings might indicate something else that we should look at.
I believe so. And also, I'm seeing it at local schools, and I think there's been studies as well that, and I'll be careful about how I say this, I guess, but certain things, social media, um, kids when they're that young, I say kids, really they'll take certain trends, they'll do certain things. When I was younger, I liked hardcore rap music when I was in school because all my friends did. So, and I still like some, rap music as well. I like everything.
Yeah.
But the point is,
You're
kids
diverse
can,
and you're inclusive, Dave. That's why you like everything.
yeah, kids can be they can be influenced greatly. And I think there was some study that said elementary kids are 800% more. Some identify as being trans. It's just, yeah, I'm not on board with that because it's not a set definition, and something I think as a country we still have morals and values, and be who you are. That's fine, but that's an issue for the parents at home,
Yeah,
not for
yeah,
the
because
school to be setting morals and values. And I think as a country, we have a set moral and value system. At least I hope it's still there.
yeah, well, it also is based on science. Scientifically,
Yeah,
biologically, you can identify two genders and that's it. And so this other aspect of it that is now being taught in schools as scientifically backed and based is totally false because it's not. Biologists all agree that there are two genders biologically, and even abortion. They could say that life starts at the point of conception. Biologically speaking, that is absolutely scientifically true, and they will admit that. But then you have these ideologies that kind of skew the science to lean in their favor. I want to ask you this because it seems obvious to me that one way to prevent STDs, pregnancy or unwanted pregnancies, which lead to abortion oftentimes, would be to abstain from having sex, abstinence. And that should be maybe an option to be taught. If you don't want to get pregnant, if you want to reduce the pregnancies in teenagers in high schools and middle schools even, you would say one way to do that is just to not have sex at all. My understanding is these bills are stripping that away as a viable option to not getting pregnant or not getting an STD.
yeah, and that's not right at all. I mean, that is something that needs to be, put out there. Yes, high school, kids, they might think, oh, they're going to do this, but that's something you need to educate people. I don't
Mm.
know why that would not be left off or focused on at all. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm looking at the legislation, the bill right now, and like you said, it's difficult to read to know exactly. That's the problem with a lot of this legislation. You do have to be a scholar to read it, and that's a problem. I wonder how many lawmakers do look over all of this, and then when it gets into law, there's
Yeah.
wiggle room and everything. So yeah, that is wrong. No, that's something that needs to be taught. I mean, that's obvious to me. But
It's funny because you bring up these scholars that have to read these pieces of legislation or even these ballot initiatives. Like you go back to Proposal 3, which, Governor Whitmer and these other people were saying that the politicians were saying all this does is it goes back to the Roe v. Wade standards, but then the Legal scholars say, no, actually, what this will do is allow new legislation. This constitutional amendment will now allow new legislation to come in to deal with everything that has to do with your biology, if it comes to
Yep.
your sex, your gender, and that means pieces of legislation that we are talking about right now. That now it's a constitutional amendment that allows us to teach kids that they can change genders. It's anything that has to do with reproduction, reproductive rights, which would have to do with your certain organs on your body, is now included in that constitutional mandate. So it wasn't just about abortion. It was about gender ideology. It was about transgenderism, and that includes everybody, including minors. Minors now have a right without their parental authority being involved whatsoever, based on Proposal 3. So back then, if you remember, yeah, I know you do, back in 2022, and all of this was being discussed and argued about Proposal 3, we would bring this up to Governor Whitmer or these other far-left ideologues and say, well, isn't this going to lead to this? Absolutely not. That is, conspiracy. That's all been debunked. Well, here we are, laws that are being created based on Proposal 3 and based on the expertise of honest legal scholars who warned about this happening. So what do we do? I mean, in your view, it's very difficult to read these. It's so vague. And how, I don't know, I guess what would you recommend for parents when
I
they're dealing with this kind of legislation?
I had so many parents who messaged me and like I had no idea what I was voting for. They watched the television commercials, they saw the headlines in the newspapers, and they made it very simple in the ads, and that's the job of the ads. But parents are like, I had no idea what I voted for. I had no idea this was in the legislation. I did a story recently. Michigan having a big battle now about there's a school district in mid-Michigan that now is allowing boys to use girls' bathroom who are transitioning, but another district is not. And the district
Yes.
that's allowing it says, well, the Elliott Larson law has changed in Michigan. In that date, that goes back to the legislation that changed. I would say always do your research, but people don't have time to do their research. And when we propose those questions to the governor or other people, we were just brushed off as radical right-wing extremist or conspiracy theory.
Fear mongers.
Yeah, and now it's actually true, and it's probably that issue could get in front of the Michigan Supreme Court, which we know how that will probably go.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a legislative fix. I don't know. It's not clear, and the legislation is written. I don't know, because you're not going to see the other side putting it out, and you're not going to see, I say, the legacy media digging into it like they didn't last time. But people are very disappointed that they voted for something that they had no idea really what was going to happen.
Well, my hope is, and this might be the case, that the Democrats who are not supportive of this, because there are some Democrats who don't want to do it, but they are under threat in the sense of being intimidated for discipline if they don't go along with the Democratic agenda, and some of them just sit out so that it doesn't come to a vote. And that we saw that a couple of weeks back with some very controversial legislation as well, that a lot of Democrat legislators called in sick or didn't show up. They had a scheduling conflict, and that prevented some of this legislation from moving forward. And that included the what is that called, the National Popular Vote
Yeah, I was
compact.
surprised
And so they
yeah,
couldn't bring that to a vote because there just wasn't enough Democrats showing up.
yeah, and that's a good thing that happened. I mean, and a lot of people don't understand that the lame duck. It happens on both sides. Republicans and Democrats both will try to put legislation through, but people are saying the election that we just had should send a message that we do not want the radical, the extreme. But like you said, the other side, they're like, let's get this through while we can. But could this hurt them or their party down the road? So they probably have a lot of soul searching. They're probably having a lot of meetings, a lot of talks to decide if we do push all this down, is it going to be any political retribution or any politics afterwards? It's interesting because a lot of the people are not. Trump won Michigan, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a mandate, but they're not listening to it. They disagree with the mandate, and they disagree actually with the majority of even of their supporters who didn't know that this is what they really meant when they're passed these very controversial, constitutional amendments and whatnot. But this is what they meant. It's coming through. But I think people's eyes are being woken up. And I mean, they're opening up, I should say, and they're seeing what's really happening before their eyes. And I think most people are sickened by it. So yeah, and so you've written about it, and you're constantly talking about these issues. I'm glad you're watching the legislature like you are, because not enough people are. You. So your Substack, is Getting Real with Dave Bondi. Is that, how did they find you on there?
Yeah, if you just search Dave Bondi, Dave Bondy, Google that and type in the word Dave Bondi Substack, and it will come up. And that's where I put out a lot of my stuff as well. I also do work for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. And that's where they have a great website called Michigan Votes, and it will literally, every time legislation is dropped, you can set up an email to yourself, michiganvotes.org. That's where I found this. And there's so much legislation that people don't know about. They'll drop it at 2 a.m. Or propose something, and just it's amazing. So I urge people, if you have time, michiganvotes.org, you'll be shocked at some of the legislation that's out there.
Yeah, thanks for waking us up to the realities of what's happening in this very far left agenda in the state of Michigan. And thankfully, the Republicans won the House there, so this kind of stuff can't be pushed through to the governor's desk, which, of course, she would willingly sign radical legislation like we're discussing right now. Dave Bondi, always good to talk with you, sir. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Have a good week.
You do the same. Thanks so much. Yeah, Dave Bondi, good guy. He is on top of a lot of these things. You could follow him on X as well. He's got a huge following there. Facebook, and I think TikTok is on there. But really beefing up his X account, Dave Bondi, keeping it real, I think is what he calls his show. But I just do what he said. I look up Dave Bondi, and you'll find him right there. But this is a very serious issue when you talk about parental rights. And they must be respected. Parents do have a fundamental right to guide their children's moral and education development. Yet this bill, it undermines that authority by mandating the teaching of these controversial topics like gender identity and sexual orientation. You're seeing what's happening. This is in Canada, this video is, and this is all fully permeating the Canadian educational system. What they're teaching their kids in Canada, not far from where I'm sitting right now, near Detroit, Michigan. It's all through the country there. It's this radical far left ideology, and it's stunning to listen these teachers teach these little children about how many genders there really are. And you might not be a boy, you might not be a girl, you may be something entirely different than all of those things. This is school, and calling it education. So now Michigan, the public schools, I mean, where they should be wanting to partner with families, not dictating the values that conflict with those values that are taught at home. They're doing these things. So abstinence, listen, there's no greater proven standard than abstinence when it comes to preventing pregnancies or, sexually transmitted diseases, or a lot of difficult challenges that your child is going to have to walk through if they're not practicing abstinence from sex, especially at a young age. Abortion's another one. It is the proven standard. But this bill in Michigan, the abandonment of abstinence as a viable option, and even as the centerpiece of sex education, disregards the only 100% effective method of preventing pregnancy and STDs. And then they instead prioritize what they call safe practices. What does that do? Well, it sends, I think, a dangerous message that risky behaviors are inevitable. You're just going to do it no matter what. And since you're going to do it, we're going to support you doing that. We'll just teach you how to do it safely. And by their use of the word safely doesn't mean morally safe. What it does to your soul and to your heart and to your mind and to your psychology. What they talk about is, yeah, you won't get a disease. Maybe. You might not if you do it this way instead. Here's a condom for you, kiddo. So it undermines personal responsibility entirely and self-discipline. Those things used to be taught. Those used to be traditional values in this country that were respected. Responsibility, self-discipline. Contraceptive distribution encourages premature choices. Providing contraceptives on school grounds normalizes teenage sexual activity. It might happen, but why are we normalizing it and affirming it and saying it's okay, you're good to go? And by removing the critical societal guardrails that encourage maturity and accountability, they're doing the opposite. they're keeping kids immature. They're keeping them kids at heart and at mind. So this whole approach here by these kids in the legislature, essentially, immature adults, it fails to address the emotional and the relational consequences of early sexual activity, leaving young people totally ill-prepared for the responsibilities all of that entails. So they say, just get an abortion instead. And then there's the gender identity aspect of this. It is curriculum. They call it training so they don't have to expose what's being taught in their classrooms. If it's curriculum, they have to show it to the parents. But look, this is what they're doing in Canada right here and in some schools in the United States. Gender identity curriculum is ideological overreach, introducing gender identity and sexual orientation and sex education imposes a far-left ideological agenda on students, infringing on the rights of families with traditional values. Schools should be focusing on academics, not on redefining foundational truths about biology and identity. And then teaching abortion as a routine option. It totally devalues life. You know, you got to present abortion now under this bill as alongside adoption, of course. Adoption, yes, you can do that too. But abortion, we like that a lot. Parenting as morally neutral choices. Morally neutral is how they're presenting abortion. It trivializes the gravity of ending a life. Education, and remember, I said this to Dave Bondi, biologists agree that life starts at conception. There's no other scientific way to really objectively define when life starts. It's at conception. So a baby in the womb is life. There's a heart beating, there's a brain developing, all of these things there's blood flowing that define life are happening in the womb. This is a baby inside. And just categorizing it as a morally neutral choice trivializes, again, the gravity of ending a life. Education should be affirming the sanctity of life, not normalizing practices that diminish its inherent value. And then this word inclusivity, it ignores traditional values altogether. Inclusivity in this phrase, in this sense, in this context, means we're going to include and accept completely immoral behavior. That's how we're being inclusive. So the bill claims to promote this inclusivity, but again, excludes and marginalizes families who hold to traditional principles. True inclusivity would respect diverse viewpoints, not enforce a singular perspective at the expense of others. And then they use this phrase, medically accurate. It doesn't equal morally sound. And while the bill insists on medically accurate instruction, it neglects the moral dimensions of sexuality and relationships. Education should go beyond biology, which they're also ignoring, by the way. But even if they do acknowledge some of the medically accurate descriptions of an abortion, like this is what abortion is, okay, it's medically accurate, but it's devastating to not only the child in the womb, but to the mother and the father who are now losing a child and all the future friends that child would have had that they will no longer because they've been killed. There's a lot of ethical considerations that would help students navigate life with wisdom and integrity that are now being totally excluded from sex education. Public schools should not promote these risky behaviors. There's no way. By focusing on contraceptive over abstinence, the bill tactically, it endorses sexual activity. It's endorsing sex, not only for a minor, but sex before marriage. That shouldn't be endorsed by a school. It's not their job to do that. Mathematics would be, teaching English, reading, writing. Those things are part of a school's job, and not endorsing certain sexual behaviors and teaching them how to do it, especially among teenagers and minors, and then downplaying its risks and all the consequences that go along with it. Schools should be guiding students towards decisions that foster long-term health and stability. Remember, these are just children still. Think about what this means to them when they become an adult. Don't encourage these behaviors that can derail their future. Is total state overreach in these moral education is totally unacceptable, and the bill represents a significant government intrusion into the personal and moral education of children, an area best left to families. It sets a troubling precedent where the state dictates values under the guise of progressive education. Students deserve a solid moral foundation. Education should equip young people with principles that promote respect, responsibility, and moral clarity. This bill, however, prioritizes controversial agendas over timeless values, which leave now these students unanchored in this world that is increasingly void of objective truth. Boy, is that true. So parents need to be aware of this, and hopefully you're calling your particular representatives in the Michigan House and in the Michigan Senate, and maybe the governor might listen to you as well. All right. Hey, listen, we'll take your comments and questions in a moment here. Chime in. I'd love to hear from you. But first, we got a bit of snow overnight. I have a daughter, by the way, who works at a local ski and snowboard resort here in Brighton, Michigan area. So we're all excited about that. We saw the rooftops covered with snow and the colder temperatures. We love winter, actually. But with that excitement comes some concerns about injuries, broken bones. I know a lot of people who, in addition to snowboarding and skiing and all of that, also play pickleball. And I haven't yet to try pickleball yet, but I've been encouraged to do so. But some of those people are now developing these strange injuries, things like lateral epicondylitis, which I just said to try to impress you. It's actually, that phrase is just tennis elbow or pickleball elbow, which is now known as. But there's other injuries too. It includes ACL, PCL tears from knee twisting, wrist fractures from falls, rotator cuff tears because of, shoulder strain and these activities out there, herniated discs from these hard impacts. So I spoke with Dr. Matthew Caid about how to deal with these. He's from Advanced Orthopedic Specialists. And once again, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Caid, an orthopedic specialist and orthopedic surgeon with Advanced Orthopedic Specialists. Good to see you, doctor. Thanks for your time.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me back.
Nice to have you. And listen, I've run into a lot of people, surprisingly so, but sports injuries is what we're going to talk about today. But pickleball is a sport that is growing in popularity. And I have noticed that there are people coming down with what they used to call tennis elbow. Now it's pickleball elbow, or as I like to phrase it, lateral epicondylitis.
Yeah.
That's the street term there. But how common is that? And how is it caused? And what do you do about it?
Yeah, it is a really common overuse sports injury. So basically that repetitive motion, especially I think it's backhands specifically. And you get tennis elbow, pickleball elbow. Over time, that area of where the tendon inserts just gets really inflamed and even starts to have some micro tears to it. So, first line treatment is, rest, ice, anti-inflammatories, things like that. There are certain straps that take pressure off of the tendon, which helps too. In rare situations, we'll do an injection of like a steroid, and very, very, very rarely you'd think about like a surgery to kind of debride that area. But yeah, first line treatment is a little bit of rest.
Yeah, rest. So, don't go on the pickleball court right away. Give it some time.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling the symptoms, back off for a little bit, and then maybe you take it to the next level after that.
A lot of those overuse injuries are like that, where if you give it some time, it usually gets better. And I always tell people, let pain guide you. If you sure you can play all day long, but if you're paying for it the next week, then maybe dial it back.
Yeah, it's hard to do. I have a twin brother who has had this condition for many, many years because he doesn't stop playing. He was an excellent tennis competitor back in his younger days. You look at things like meniscus tears. These are sports injuries that often happens from like sudden twisting motions or maybe some deep knee bending during sports. What are the early warning signs of a meniscus tear, and how can you deal with it prior to becoming a real serious issue?
Yeah. Meniscus tears typically are from an acute injury for younger people. So some of the older people, so weekend warrior kind of people who have some degeneration of their knee already, so a little bit of arthritis. But to answer your question, you'll start to feel like some clicking, some catching, some popping, what we call mechanical symptoms. And then that's kind of clues us in. And then if you have an injury, tweak it, twist it, something like that, then a small tear can become a big tear, and that usually needs to get either repaired or shaved down and kind of resected out of the way. So
when you're dealing with the meniscus tears, I mean, what are some of the common? I mean, I've torn my meniscus, and I did it via running. Over time, it just kind of wore down, and finally, it just kind of gave way, apparently. But what are some of the more common ways that somebody might tear their meniscus?
It's as simple as missing a curb, planting. I mean, for older people, it could be anything really. Getting out of bed the wrong way, but most young people, they have a planted foot or they're jumping, something like that. High impact with twisting, so that usually does it. And people can also have ACL tears.
Right.
So your anterior cruciate ligament, which is in the center of your knee, that can be associated with it as well. So if you hear a pop and your knee blows up and it's really swollen, you could have an ACL tear as well.
Sometimes you can't tell, because I've been told, sometimes, well, it could be a torn meniscus, it could be an ACL. How do you figure that out? I mean, are the symptoms that similar that it's kind of hard to, I guess, off the surface, decipher what it is? I mean, for the patient, for the person.
Yeah, for the patient,
But you know exactly what.
When we bring you into the clinic, we get a good history from you and we do a physical exam, and then we usually know what it is, but to confirm, we'll get an MRI. So that shows the soft tissue of the knee, and then we'll know exactly what you need. But no, patients, it's hard to tell if you haven't been in healthcare. So I'd recommend just going and seeing a good board-certified orthopedic surgeon, and they'll be able to kind of direct you on where you need to go.
With those two things, I mean, the meniscus, and I've been told surgery is a good option for that. If it's bad enough, I mean, that's how you're eventually going to heal it. You got to kind of deal with it surgically for the most part.
Yeah.
Is that the same with the ACL?
Yeah. So typically for a young athlete, 100%, you need to get it fixed.
Yeah.
For people who have some arthritis, like we talked about, sometimes you can do some physical therapy, and if the muscles around it get strong enough, if you're not doing pivoting or aggressive sports, you might be okay, actually.
Broken bones, obviously very common. I, grew up doing some things like, surfing, and not a lot of broken bones in that, but that translates to things like snowboarding. And I know that in snowboarding, which is popular here in Michigan as well, we got all these resorts around us. But when you're dealing with you fall backwards, and I know that forearms are a common injury, a broken forearm of some sort, or something like that when snowboarding. What are some of the best ways, I guess, to prevent the most effective, like proactive maybe gear to help you deal with, to prevent, I guess, more of a preventative measure?
Yeah,
when you're dealing with these things?
The wrist braces can help. The most common one is what we call a distal radius fracture. So when you fall into an outstretched hand. But really, I mean, staying upright and not falling is obviously the best that you can do. But there's a lot of, small carpal bones that we look out for too. So if you do injure your wrist and you're seen at like an urgent care or an ER, and they, sometimes they'll just say, oh, go see the orthopedic surgeon, and they don't give you much information. Really encourage people to do that, because you can have other, what we call occult fractures, where you can't really see them on x-ray. So there's a little bone called the scaphoid in your wrist, and sometimes they miss that. And then if you don't see that fracture, it will go on to like a non-union, it won't heal, and you'll have really, really significant pathology in your wrist if you don't catch it. So if you have bumps or bruises and they say to see ortho, go see ortho and make sure you get completely evaluated.
So to talk about them, I mean, what are the consequences when you say that you're going to see some severe pathology? What does that mean? Are you talking about like arthritis or some other things like that?
Yeah, so if that bone does not heal, so sometimes it needs a little screw in it so that it'll heal. And if you miss that, then that bone can collapse.
Wow.
And it's a very important bone in your wrist. Yeah.
Okay. Are there different times of the year in your experience that there are different types of injuries that are more common? Like I know we're going into winter right now, and I don't know if snowboarding is or skiing or those types of injuries, as opposed to maybe in the springtime it's baseball. Maybe there's football season is right now as well. Do you notice a kind of an ebb and flow in the different type of injuries that come into your office?
We do, and we see a lot of people coming from Mount Brighton. They come over with their snowboard and ski injuries. I think some of our elderly people, it's kind of a steady flow of elderly people because they're usually, getting up to go to the restroom at night, and they usually take a fall, and that's usually pretty consistent, no matter the time of year. But then, football season, definitely. We get some baseball injuries in the spring as well. So it's cyclical, but there's always somebody coming through the door with.
What I'm curious about baseball, what are more of the common injuries that, you hear often about, Tommy John surgery, and we got the pitchers, but what are some of the things that you see as related to baseball?
So honestly, baseball, we will see a decent amount of ACL injuries. Tommy John, so the ulnar collateral ligament in the elbow is what that is. And that needs to be reconstructed. I think we see it more so in our college athletes. The high school kids usually have really good, strict pitch counts, which is very, very important.
Right.
Which I think most of the coaches in the area are good about that now. So, seeing a Tommy John injury in a kid who's 15 or 16 is not good to see, and that should be prevented from the adults coaching them, hopefully.
What do you say to the guy? Because I'm one of them. I have been, not any longer. I've learned my lesson, but there's a lot of guys out there that were like me who say, yeah, it's going to be fine. I'll walk it off. It'll heal on its own. And it never really does. And I've talked to many of these guys now years later who wish they had gone back and fixed it. What do you say to the guy? I'm going to say the guy. It could be a gal as well. Who says, nah, I don't want to go in to talk to a doctor about this. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a recipe for disaster, whether it's, medical issues, orthopedic issues, anything. You have to get a diagnosis, a solid diagnosis, and then treat it. Things will get worse. They will, if you miss something that's simple to fix and you just sweep it under the rug. Yeah, we see it all the time. I didn't want to come in, and then it makes a simple problem complex, and sometimes it can make your surgery a little more complex.
So, an advanced orthopedic specialist, I mean, you're dealing it from the maybe some preventive type of things, or maybe some minor treatments, all the way to and through and including surgery.
Oh yeah, we have physical therapy. Our therapists are fantastic. We have biologic, stem cells, PRP, everything really. And then, obviously we do surgery. So we try to prevent it or delay your surgery if we can. But if you need it, then, we're happy to help.
More information. Where do people go? Your website?
Yeah. Advancedortho.net. We are right on Grand River here in Brighton. So, and then I'm on Facebook, Instagram, all that.
Yeah, very good. It's always good to talk to you. Dr. Matthew Caid with Advanced Orthopedic Specialist. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks to Dr. Matthew Caid. Good guy and really strong practice there if you want to check him out. I want to give you a quick update, then we're going to get your comments here in a second here regarding the House of Representatives. Where it stands right now, it's Republicans gain another seat, so it's 219 right now to the Democrats. So it's a slim majority still that the Republicans hold in the House. The size of that narrow margin will not be known until the final 3 undecided races are called. They're still counting this. What has it been? Over 2 weeks now? It was 2 weeks on Tuesday. Today's Thursday. So over 2 weeks now, and they still haven't decided these races in California and in Iowa. But yesterday, the Associated Press did call this Ohio race the 9th Congressional District for the Democratic incumbent Representative Marcy Kaptur, and also Alaska's at-large district for a Republican, the entrepreneur Nick Begich. So that is what upped the count for the Republicans to 219. They flipped that seat by ousting Democratic incumbent Representative Mary Sadler-Peltola. So again, the 3 races that still have yet not been called in the House, there's 2 in California, and 1 in Iowa as well. So again, the balance of power currently sitting at 219 for the Republicans and 213 for the Democrats in the House of Representatives. Hopefully we'll finish up today. What's taking so long? All right, let's take some calls here and some, comments and questions if you have them. Let's bring them up one by one. Harry Sakalian. Hi, Tom. The issue of parents opting out of this sex education initiative by the Dems begs the question, how are all parents notified of their opt-out option? Thank you, Harry Sakalian. That's the issue. It used to be you had to opt in. Like they would tell you, listen, if you want to be a part of this, check this. Now it's the opposite. You have to be informed, first of all, that they're being taught this stuff, which I have a hard time believing that the school is making every effort to make every parent aware of what their kids are being taught in this sex ed curriculum. Again, a lot of it's training, so they don't have to reveal necessarily because it's not curriculum. It's not really being taught. They're just being trained. That's part of the little kind of workaround, this loophole that they can find themselves through by keeping parents away from the scene of the crime, if you will. But yeah, that's the issue. You've got to opt out, and if you're not aware of it, you're not going to opt out, are you? So, very good point, Harry. Thanks so much. Let's bring up another one here. It is Annie. Hey, good to see you and hear from you, Annie. Very good conversation regarding biology versus political viewpoints. Isn't that the case? Biologically speaking, scientifically speaking, many of these things in this bill and many others as well are completely invalid. They should never be allowed because they go against the data and the science that they claim they follow. It is not biologically true that it is, for abortion, for example, that's not a baby in the womb. It is biologically true that is a living human being in the womb, that life starts at conception. That's biologically accurate, scientifically speaking. It's also not biologically true that there are more than two genders. There are only two genders. And then the argument is, well, yeah, but there's the identity aspect of this too that we have to now factor in. We really need to address with compassion and with kindness and with truth what might be happening with these kids. And there might be a whole slew of reasons why suddenly the number of kids who are claiming that they are, non-binary or they are the different gender from what they were at birth might have to do with a social contagion. And a lot of people who support, gender transitioning admit that, that's actually what's happening here. So if they admit it, we should admit it as well. In fact, this is so, the messaging out there that it's now cool to be, non-binary or, non-heterosexual, whatever you want to call it, because it's cool and accepted. And the other side is demonized. Listen, if you're, especially middle-aged white men know this is the case now, that you're now demonized if you fall into that particular category, as I wave my hand right here. All right, thank you for that, Annie. Appreciate it very much. Let's bring up another one. Catherine L'Esperance. The innocence of our children is being stripped away. Get these Democrats out. Our governor celebrates abortion. She does. You're right. Wearing T-shirts, my body, my choice. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, please. Yeah, the whole bodily autonomy. Of course you have bodily autonomy, but that doesn't mean that it's morally wrong to have sex with some guy if you're a girl for 13, or vice versa if you're a guy with a girl when you're 13 years old, and there should be informed consent. Like, if you do this, here's responsibility now that you've got to, live your life with. The consequences are A, B, and C. And I don't recommend that you just try to sweep this under the rug by getting an abortion, by killing a baby. I don't recommend you do that. I recommend you take accountability and responsibility for what you're doing. Now, when I was in high school, I know, I'm an old guy now, but they used to have students, I think they carried around an egg for like a week, and you had to care for the egg because the egg was fragile. And the whole idea behind it was, an egg is pretty easy compared to having a baby, but when you think about how you need to care for that egg without breaking it, there's some responsibility there. And the message was, think twice, think 3 times before you go out and have sex, because sex often leads to pregnancy. In fact, that's how pregnancy happens. I think they're still teaching that in schools. Are they? Do we know if they are? Are they still teaching that pregnancy is caused by having sex? I don't know if that's part of the education now. But anyway, if you're not being taught that is how it happens. And that's what moms and dads used to be able to tell their children before the schools are going behind their back and, upending all these scientific, conclusions that everybody already knows, obviously, is common sense. But yeah, I think it's still true. I think that sex does lead to pregnancy. Nowadays, pregnancy often leads to abortion. And that's being supported by these teachers and these schools and these politicians, these legislators, and this governor. You're right. She celebrates abortion. She would prefer that over the other options. Thank you so much. Good content. Let's bring up another one here. Another comment from Mike Mary Savigny. One of those might be right. Mike, Mary, thank you so much. Thanks for being strong and bold, brother. You got it. Stay strong and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you for that encouragement. It used to be common sense. It used to be kind of normal to talk this way. Now you have to be courageous because people in like the Michigan legislature will try to go after you and silence you and tell you you have no right to speak about these options. And I'm like, yeah, we do. There is a First Amendment, but even more than that, even if there wasn't a First Amendment, I'm a man, I'm a father, I've got people I care about, and I'm going to speak about things that I know objectively are true and things I know objectively are false. And right now, this iteration of our Michigan legislature, until they switch it back to Republican control, is so debased at this point. And yeah, I will use strong language because they are lying to these kids. And they have been. They've been lying through Proposal 3 and these advertisements they put out there. They lie to you, say it's not going to lead to the legislation which we are now considering. We said that in 2022. This is what's going to happen legislatively if Proposal 3 goes through. And they said it wasn't true. And here we are. The truth is staring us right in the face. So if Democrats ever win the House or take a majority in the Senate again or the governor's mansion, it's in complete disregard of what now can be objectively acknowledged as they were purposely misleading millions of people to get this stuff through so they can do what they want behind your back. So what used to be common sense now takes courage to do so. But I appreciate, Mike, the encouragement there very much. Thank you. And thank you for staying strong and courageous as well. All right, let's bring up another one here. We have Greg Wolf is back. As my 5th grade teacher told the girls in our class many years ago, if you don't want to get pregnant, keep your knees together. It's true, right? I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. It doesn't take a scholar to recognize that. I mean, I kind of recognized that when I was, I think, 10 years old. So it's a pretty basic solution to many of these social ills that plague us right now. Keep your knees together. Thank you for that, Mr. Wolf. Let's bring up another one here. It's Catherine Leas-Bronce is back. Tom, we need you as our governor. Thank you for saying that, but no thank you. You're intelligent, ethical, and have a sound background in broadcasting. You would center yourself around sound, principled people who have common sense. Catherine, I appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say. That would be a battle royale, wouldn't it? Politics I'm fine talking about it. But going into that realm, boy, that takes a different type of a person, I think, altogether. But thank you for saying that. We do need someone with sound principles, common sense, and who can communicate those things honestly. Man, can you imagine if politicians became honest and when they made a mistake, admitting that was wrong, I don't know what I was thinking there, I'm never going to do that again, and then follow through with that promise that you're never going to do that again. That would be so, and I've done that in my life. We all have to. We all have to recognize, okay, we made mistakes when I was younger, when I was, an adult, in my middle age. We make mistakes every day. Recognize them and learn from them and grow up, become mature and sound. I like that word, sound. Catherine, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. One more here, and we'll say so long after this. Let's talk about it. It's Joe Spalding. That's called toxic masculinity. And the guy with the better hair is right. It is a disaster. Yeah, he does have good hair. Joe, you got that right. Matthew Caid, I actually very much admire his hairline. It's like down to here. It's nicely styled. Joe, you're always making such good points out there. So that was a good point. The other one you're calling about toxic masculinity, yeah, we need actual masculinity. What Joe Spalding calls toxic is actually just inner strength with men who are actually willing to speak when they're told to shut up. Don't listen to that anymore. And Joe Spalding, if you don't know, he ran for some Ottawa County seat a few years back, I think it was, and he lost, but he's a very divisive character. So somebody who calls me toxic masculinity is going out there and constantly getting in people's faces and calling them names and looking at the shoes they wear and based on their shoe brand, calling them Nazis. And that's toxic, Joe. I do hope that you, along with many people of your ilk, wake up and realize your little shtick isn't working anymore. The lies that you propagate on X and social media are so, and Joe Spalding is steeped in Marxism. He brags about how much he has studied the Marxist philosophers and all that, and that I shouldn't talk about that because I haven't read as in depth as he has. And I think, well, I don't want to, because what you have done is you have indoctrinated yourself. And I feel sorry. I do hope, Joe, that you do come around, that your eyes do open up to how deeply you've been deceived and you do come to the light. Because I do believe that you actually care about people. I think that you do probably have a good intent, and that's what it's all started with, but the ends doesn't justify the means. And brother, your means are really toxic. Thank you for your comment. And thank you all for listening and watching the program. We'll be back tomorrow with another great one. It's Tom Jordan Live. You can find us at TomJordanLive.com, also Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow.